Good evening. Perth's most recognisable bikie, Dayne Brajkovich, has been stabbed in the neck and...
Perth had seen gang wars before, but nothing like this. The night air was split by shouting and sirens as police swarmed Scarborough. In the middle of the chaos stood Dayne Brajkovich, shirtless, tattooed from scalp to toe, his face slick with blood and sweat. His gold chain caught the streetlights as he fought to catch his breath, eyes still locked on the rival biker lying motionless nearby. Officers grabbed him, forcing his arms behind his back, but Dayne barely flinched, chest still heaving, fists still curled, as if the fight wasn't finished. For most of Perth, this was just another wild bikie brawl. But for Dayne, it marked the start of something far worse. Within weeks, his world would implode. Allies would become enemies. The brotherhood he'd given everything for would cast him out, and by the end of it, he'd be lying in a hospital bed with a hole torn through his neck, refusing to name the men who tried to finish him. Miss the button? Go ahead. Subscribe now so you don't forget later. Dayne Brajkovich was born on November 11, 1979, in the tough, working-class streets of Belmont, Perth. From the very beginning, life demanded toughness, and the streets demanded respect. Raised by a single mother, he developed a close, protective bond with her and his younger sister Haley, but his relationship with his father was a different story, a tense, fractured connection that left deep scars. When his father passed away in 2023, Dayne admitted he felt no grief, revealing the early lessons of detachment and self-reliance that would shape his life. Even as a boy, rebellion ran in his veins, a defiance that no school or authority could contain. School offered no refuge. At Ursula Fra Catholic College, his aggression clashed with teachers and administrators alike, ultimately earning him expulsion. It was a public display of a private truth. Dayne could not be controlled. He moved to Belmont High, but trouble followed like a shadow. It was here that he met Tristan Bam Bam Albury, a rival whose presence would define much of his early life. Their clashes were violent, brutal, and unforgettable. One incident at a party in Carlisle saw Tristan land a crushing uppercut, bending Dayne's nose, a mark that would carry the memory of defeat, but it did nothing to diminish the fire burning inside him. From these early battles, he forged a worldview that would guide every choice. Respect must be earned, fear is currency, and weakness is fatal. After leaving school, Dayne stepped into the night, taking a job as a bouncer on nightclub doors. The work was dangerous, unpredictable, and exactly the kind of environment that suited him. Each confrontation sharpened instincts honed over years of schoolyard fights. Every aggressive gesture, every challenge met and mastered, reinforced his growing reputation. The thrill of intimidation became a second skin, and the controlled chaos of the club scene taught him lessons that no classroom ever could. Soon, he turned that aggression into skill, training in Muay Thai, a brutal, disciplined combat sport that matched his taste for violence with precision and control. The pinnacle of this early fighting career came in 2001 when Dayne stepped into the ring against Nick Special K Carr at Melbourne's Vodafone Arena. 10,000 eyes watched, but Dayne's focus was singular: dominance. 9 contests, 5 wins, 4 losses. The record told one story, but the streets told another. His real strength wasn't measured by points or trophies. It was measured in the raw, uncontrolled environment of street fights, where instinct, intimidation, and timing could win or destroy a man in seconds. A scheduled opportunity to compete for the Western Australian heavyweight title evaporated when the law intervened, but it was merely a detour on a path that was always meant for more dangerous arenas. At 22, the consequences of his choices caught up. Prison became inevitable. Initially housed at Wuru Prison Farm, Dayne's time there was brief but instructive. A fight forced his transfer to the more secure Acacia Prison, where rules were absolute and survival required cunning. He served 2 years behind bars, absorbing lessons that would never leave him. Never show weakness, never speak to authorities, and cultivate fear at all costs. His father's words echoed as a mantra: give them nothing. Every scar, every calculated move inside those walls became a tool, a weapon, a blueprint for the next phase of his life. Emerging from prison, he was scarred but sharpened. more prepared than ever for the world he had already been training to dominate. By the time he walked free, the streets and clubs of Perth were already primed for him. Every scuffle, every fight, every lesson learned behind walls and in the night had built him for one thing: the outlaw life. It was only a matter of time before he would rise, not just as a fighter, but as a force within the Hells Angels, a man whose size, willingness to strike first, and refusal to bend to authority would make him one of the most feared enforcers in Perth's criminal underworld. Every step of his youth, every choice made in defiance of authority, every bruise and broken nose had led him to this point, setting the stage for the legend that would soon be written in tattoos, violence, and notoriety. The summer of 2020 was about to mark a turning point in Dayne Brajkovich's life. By then, he was already a figure feared and respected in Perth's underworld, a man whose presence demanded attention. But nothing would cement his reputation like a single night at Scarborough's sandbar. It started as a clash of egos, a public brawl with Nick Martin, the notorious Rebels boss. CCTV captured every punch, every shove, every retaliatory strike. Dayne moved like a predator in a cage, landing blow after calculated blow while Martin struggled to defend himself. The fight wasn't just physical, it was a public statement: defiance, dominance, and the assertion that Dayne would not be challenged lightly. He later pleaded guilty to fighting in public, fined a mere $800, but the incident did far more than draw legal attention. It ignited a feud, one that would quickly spiral beyond bars and brawls into blood and law enforcement scrutiny. Just 2 weeks after the Scarborough's sandbar incident, Nick Martin was assassinated at Perth's Motorplex in a sniper-style hit. The timing was brutal, the message unmistakable. Police and media immediately connected the dots to Dayne, linking the public brawl to the meticulously planned murder. Yet, as always, Dayne remained silent. He denied involvement, refused to comment, and maintained the code that had guided him since youth: loyalty, discretion, and survival above all else. The assassination sent shockwaves through Perth's criminal underworld. Allies and rivals alike reevaluated their positions, questioning loyalty and anticipating retaliation. For Dayne, the event was a reminder that visibility was both power and danger. Every newspaper headline, every broadcast carried the weight of scrutiny, but also the affirmation of his dominance. It was a public performance of fearlessness that few could match, and one that made him both respected and hunted. Authorities moved swiftly. The Western Australian government unleashed raids on bikie headquarters, pushing arrests and stricter enforcement of anti-bikie laws. Dayne's world had transformed overnight. He was no longer just a feared enforcer, he was the focal point of a citywide manhunt, the embodiment of a problem the state was desperate to solve. Surveillance, media attention, and police pressure mounted, forcing every move to be calculated, every contact scrutinized. In the midst of escalating danger, the feud was no longer a personal battle. It had become a public spectacle, a test of power, and a warning to anyone who thought they could challenge him. By the end of 2020, the Scarborough's sandbar fight and the assassination of Nick Martin had done more than ignite a feud. They had reshaped Perth's underworld. Dayne Brajkovich had drawn a line in the sand, one that marked the start of a violent, high-stakes chapter in his life. His every decision from that point forward would be watched, judged, and feared as the law closed in and rivalries sharpened. The game had changed, and Dayne was ready to play it on his terms. By early 2021, Dayne Brajkovich's notoriety had reached a fever pitch. The Scarborough's sandbar brawl and Nick Martin's assassination had already made him a household name in Perth's underworld. But fame, in his world, was inseparable from danger. Every headline, every broadcast, amplified the scrutiny around him, and the law was watching more closely than ever. Yet it wasn't just the authorities who posed a threat. Rivals lurked in every shadow, waiting for an opening, waiting for a moment of weakness. In March 2021, that threat materialized in the most violent way possible. Dayne's home in Ascot became the target of a drive-by shooting, a brazen attack narrowly missing his wife, Justinta, and her daughter. Witnesses described stolen vehicles, a black Porsche and a white Mercedes, used in the hit, a level of coordination that left little doubt. This was a professional strike, a calculated warning. The event underscored the escalating stakes. Dayne was no longer just a public figure. He was a target, and the very people he once considered rivals were willing to strike at his family. But retaliation was never far behind. In a twist that highlighted the brutal logic of outlaw loyalties, Tristan Albury, Dayne's longtime schoolyard enemy and now a figure in the criminal underworld, became indirectly involved. While both men were incarcerated, Albury learned that Jacob Peter Gorton had supplied the vehicles used in the drive-by. During their limited recreation time in the Special Handling Unit, Albury assaulted Gorton, effectively avenging the attack on Dayne. The incident was a reminder of the razor-thin line between friend and foe in their world. Alliances were temporary, loyalty was tested constantly, and vengeance could arrive in the most unexpected forms. Meanwhile, the police and media pressure intensified. Every attack, every brawl, every publicized feud became part of a growing dossier on Dayne. Law enforcement ramped up surveillance, raids, and investigative efforts, while the media's fascination transformed him into a living spectacle. For Dayne, the attention was a double-edged sword. It amplified his power, his fear factor, and his legend. But it also meant every misstep, every confrontation was amplified, dissected, and exploited by those hunting him. Within the Hells Angels, internal pressure mounted as well. His high-profile persona attracted both admiration and scrutiny from fellow members. The expectations of loyalty, aggression, and uncompromising behavior were higher than ever. Dayne was living in a world where every fight, every decision, and every public appearance could ignite new feuds, trigger legal consequences, or escalate violence to deadly extremes. By the end of 2021, the tension surrounding Dayne Brajkovich had become a constant, almost tangible force. Drive-bys, retaliation, police scrutiny, and media attention created a pressure cooker in which one misstep could ignite chaos. Every move he made had to be calculated, every action a statement of dominance. The streets, the law, and the underworld were all closing in, and Dayne was perfectly positioned at the eye of the storm, ready to strike, survive, and command respect in a world where fear and violence were the only constants. By 2022, Dayne Brajkovich had become one of Perth's most recognizable outlaw figures, a man whose reputation was etched not just in his actions, but into the very skin of his body. His tattoos, covering his scalp, face, ears, and eyelids with Hells Angels imagery and slogans, were more than ink. They were statements of identity, loyalty, and fear. But even the strongest loyalties can fracture, and for Dayne, that fracture came from within the Brotherhood itself. The catalyst was a confrontation with the Hells Angels Club president, an incident shrouded in rumor and secrecy, but severe enough to change everything. Reports suggested an alleged attack on the president. The details never fully confirmed, but the consequences were undeniable. Dayne was expelled from the club he had dedicated his life to, the brotherhood he had tattooed across his body and soul. For a man who had built his identity around loyalty to the Angels, it was a devastating blow. A moment where the world he knew, structured, predictable, and ruled by strict codes, crumbled in an instant. Despite the expulsion, Dayne refused to remove his tattoos. Where others might have covered or erased their past to survive, he kept his body as a living testament to his loyalty and defiance. Each image, each symbol, became a billboard of both past allegiance and current independence. It was a declaration. I may be cast out, but I am still who I am, unrepentant and untouchable. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Without the protection of the Angels, Dayne's position in the underworld became precarious. Rival factions and internal adversaries recognized the vulnerability that had never existed before. Every step he took, every appearance he made, carried heightened risk. Yet Dayne navigated it with the same calculated aggression that had defined his life from the streets of Belmont to the nightclub doors and prison cells. Expelled but undiminished, he became a symbol of defiance within the outlaw world, feared, unpredictable, and untethered by formal allegiances. This expulsion marked more than just a personal loss. It was a turning point in Dayne's narrative. The man who had been an enforcer, a figurehead and a symbol of the angel's dominance, now walked outside the boundaries of that brotherhood. The world watched, rivals waited, and the law circled. But Dayne's response was unmistakable. He would survive, adapt, and continue his reign on his own terms. In the outlaw code, expulsion was meant to break a man, but for Dayne, it became fuel, setting the stage for the next wave of violence, notoriety, and public spectacle. By early 2023, Dayne Brajkovich's notoriety was once again in the public eye, this time not for violence, but for a surreal brush with legality. In March, he appeared briefly in the fallout from the Perth mint gold scandal, a high-profile investigation exposing systemic failures in Australia's government-owned mint. Dayne had purchased $27,000 worth of gold using only a driver's license, bypassing enhanced checks despite his criminal history. While authorities scrutinized the transaction, Dayne's presence in the Western Australian Residential Tenancy Court, decked in a red tracksuit, gold chain worth roughly $216,000, bracelets, and rings spelling Cena and hate, turned him into a living headline, a spectacle of wealth, defiance, and audacity. Legal proceedings swirled around him, minor and major, civil and criminal, but Dayne moved through them like a storm, unshaken, observing every reaction, every camera, every whisper. But notoriety brings danger in equal measure. On the evening of Friday, December 8th, 2023, Dayne faced the most immediate threat to his life. Outside the Ministry of Sound classic music event at Kings Park, he was ambushed, stabbed in the neck by a group on motorcycles. The attack was swift, brutal, and coordinated, evidence of both planning and personal motive. He was rushed to Royal Perth Hospital, undergoing emergency surgery to repair a near-fatal laceration. Even in the chaos, Dayne's composure remained. He left the hospital under police escort the following day, accompanied by his wife, refusing to disclose any details about the attack or the assailants. Silence had always been his shield. Now it was survival itself. The stabbing was more than a violent encounter. It was a declaration. The world of Perth's underworld, already turbulent from rivalries and law enforcement pressure, had marked him as a target, but Dayne had survived where many would have fallen. The razor-thin lines of loyalty, vengeance, and public fascination had converged into a singular moment of life-or-death clarity. Every scar, every bullet lodged, every surgical stitch became part of a living testimony to resilience. The aftermath only intensified the tension. Police investigations found no arrests, leaving the feud unresolved. Dayne's silence, the code of the outlaw, protected both him and his attackers, reinforcing the lethal psychology of Perth's criminal underworld. The streets, the law, and rival factions all recalibrated in response to the event. For Dayne, it was a stark reminder that survival was a constant, high-stakes game where every decision, every move, every gesture could mean the difference between life and death. By the close of 2023, Dayne Brajkovich had endured the impossible, yet remained standing. Expelled from the Angels, under legal scrutiny and physically scarred, he had not only survived, he had solidified his place as one of Australia's most notorious, enduring, and unbroken outlaws. Survival, for him, was both a skill and a statement, a second climax that would define the very nature of his legend. By 2024, the dust had settled, but the consequences of Dayne Brajkovich's violent, high-profile life remained omnipresent. Expelled from the Hells Angels, scarred from attacks and under intense legal scrutiny, Dayne was no longer a member of any formal outlaw club, but that did not diminish his notoriety. Police continued to monitor his movements, every appearance and interaction logged, every rumor scrutinized. The state's attention was constant, a shadow that followed him wherever he went, yet it had not broken him. Meanwhile, the media fascination persisted. Dayne had become more than a criminal figure. He was a symbol of the outlaw lifestyle in Australia, a man whose every choice sparked debate, fear, or admiration. His appearances in court, often adorned in gold jewelry and signature tattoos, were spectacles that reinforced the mythos he had cultivated over decades. Legal battles, both civil and criminal, continued to swirl around him, a reminder that the law and the public spotlight were ever-present forces in his life. Despite the danger and constant surveillance, Dayne remained resolute, navigating his world with the same calculated defiance that had carried him through fights, prison stints, and assassination attempts. He had survived the impossible, endured the loss of loyalty, and faced both rivals and authorities without flinching. The streets knew him, the courts knew him, and the public continued to watch. But through it all, Dayne maintained control over his own narrative. In many ways, the resolution of his story was not an ending, but a continuation. Dayne's legend persisted, shaped by resilience, reputation, and the very public reminder that even without formal club affiliation, he remained one of Australia's most recognizable outlaws. The law, rivals, and media alike had learned that the man who had risen from the streets of Belmont was not easily shaken, and the chapter of Dayne Brajkovich's life, though scarred and scrutinized, was far from closed. The final chapter of Dayne Brajkovich's story does not come with closure. It comes with uncertainty, a reminder that in the world he inhabits, silence can be as powerful as a gunshot. Despite the near-fatal stabbing outside Kings Park in December 2023, no arrests have ever been made. The perpetrators remain at large, their identities unknown, their motives clear only to those within the shadows of Perth's outlaw networks. Dayne himself has said nothing, revealing nothing, adhering to a code that has defined him since the streets of Belmont. Never give the authorities an inch, never betray an ally, never show fear. The feud that erupted from the Scarborough sandbar brawl, intensified by Nick Martin's assassination and escalated by the drive-by attack, remains unresolved. Alliances are fragile, rivalries simmer, and every player in the underworld knows that the conflict is far from over. Leaving the Hells Angels did not end the war, it simply changed its battleground. Dayne walks a path lined with danger and scrutiny, a man marked by tattoos, headlines, and reputation, yet untouchable in his silence and defiance. It is this silence, this unyielding presence, that solidifies his legend. He is both a survivor and a symbol, a figure whose story is defined as much by what remains unseen as by the violence the public has witnessed. The streets, the law, and the media continue to track him, each encounter a reminder that in this world, power is measured by resilience, cunning, and the ability to endure when the odds are stacked against you. Dayne Brajkovich's story ends not with resolution, but with anticipation. The feud continues, the dangers persist, and the eyes of the underworld and the authorities alike remain fixed on him. Expelled from the Angels, legally challenged, and scarred by attacks, he is still standing, still feared, still watched, still untouchable. In the streets of Perth and across Australia, Dayne has cemented himself as one of the most recognizable outlaws of his generation. The war is not over, and as long as he breathes, neither is the legend. You're still here? Do what you meant to do earlier. Subscribe.